problem is that this whole piece is all just one layer in layers panel, right? So this layers thing is not something that I can, I can take into After Effects. If I were to take this in After Effects, it would just show up as one layer and I could move the whole thing, but that's not very fun for like the interactivity of your pieces and your parts for your site. So what I would want to do is start splitting these sections. So if I know this yellow piece here and this size this text right here, that is something that I want to move separately, I need to put those on the same layer. So what I can do is I can hit Command X to cut it. I can make a new layer, make sure that's below my top layer because I want this one at the back, and then hit Command Shift and V and paste in place. So that is going to be one layer then. And what I want to do with this is to label it, because something that you don't have in After Effects that you do in Illustrator is these nice little icons, right? So if I go to Panel Options, I can make these large little icons. So I can actually see what's in the layer just based on the icon. In After Effects, it's just going to show up as like a little piece of paper that has AI on it, like Adobe Illustrator. So each of the layers will look like that, which is kind of a pain in the butt, so you can't really see what you're working on. So I do want to take the time to say this is by size, yellow. So it's the yellow piece that's at the back, so that I know that's what that is. Now, if I want to do map here, which I think I moved this down slightly, move that back up. So if I want to do map, again, Command and X, I'm going to hit a new layer, put those in between, and then I will select this layer and Command Shift and paste and V, so that we actually get that in there. And again, this one is by map. So if these are the pieces that I want to move, OJ, I need to make sure that they're all on the same layer. This one may be also, I've grouped it together, but again, After Effects doesn't recognize groups from Illustrator. That would be nice. Command and X, I'll make a new layer. This one's going to be at the top. This is going to be my logo type, Command and paste to paste that logo type in. So it's the logo type with the tagline. If you're in Photoshop, it's probably mostly split up for you already. You might actually have to combine some pieces together. So this is sort of a dark green rectangle. Here's like a light blue rectangle. Here's like an orange rectangle. If I wanted to combine those together into one group, I would layer them up so they're next to each other, select them all, and then I could go to merge layers, which is Command and E, right? So you guys are familiar with that? So that way I could combine these together. And I've already taken the time to sort of go through and like list out what each of these pieces are so that you can see them. They're already listed and written out, so that is helpful. Now this is sort of a demo site. Again, it's the same concept, camp.io. It's just a place where you can go and get like your app pieces. I have gone a little bit further with this. So I do have my background separated into different pieces that I would like them to move. This forest piece, I just cut it out from the background and then made it a little bit bigger so that it fills up more space so that I can kind of move those pieces separately in the background. And I've done that with this piece as well, right? So sort of just moved it around so that it fills up some extra space of my screen. So Photoshop maybe saves you a little bit of time, but you do need to be careful about, again, your layering, how those things are layered, and then also the names of all of your layers. So let's jump into After Effects. So all I've done this morning so far is just open up After Effects. I haven't done anything else. A couple things you might want to do to get started. There's a couple boxes that popped up for me that's sort of like introduction to After Effects. You can close this if you want to. All I need to do is start getting my Photoshop file or my Illustrator file actually placed into After Effects. So I could go to File and Open if I want to. I can also just navigate to my Finder and I can find that Photoshop file and then just click and drag it into this project section. So the project section is over here. I just need to drag and drop that file in, and it can be the PSD file. So I'm just dragging and dropping that in. Once I have that in there, it's going to give me some options that I can choose. You may need to change this to retain layer sizes or to change to the composition size, but make sure that this is editable layer styles, not merge layer styles into footage. If you put it into footage, it'll kind of mess it up. It'll become all just one layer. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. This will add in my composition here, and it's also gotten my layers added in as well. And again, those are all just Photoshop files that I threw in here. Now what I'm going to do is drag this to my timeline, which is down here. and that will actually place my image and my composition in together into this space. So there's my composition right there. Now I can get into my composition by double clicking here to get to this space where my Photoshop files are. So they're all there again by the layers that I organized them. I'm going to close that just for a second. Go back to that previous screen. We may need to double check that your screen size is correct, especially if you guys built your web page really tall and long, right? So what we're going to do is go to the composition, new composition, and composition settings up here. So composition settings, if you go there, you can change some of those settings are, including what your image height is. So you guys may have, 5 sections or 4 sections already that are built that way. You want to make sure that you can, readjust this to the correct size of the screen, which was 768. So 1366 by 768. This is also the space where you can add more time if you need more than 30 seconds. So this is 30 seconds. The first group is frames, if you needed to add individual frames. This is based on about 30 frames per second. So that will be able to sort of give you a similar to real life speed. That's kind of the general speed that the human eye can see is 30 frames a second. So this is the duration in seconds. This would be minutes. This would be hours. We probably don't need hours, but you can increase this number here to change the duration. And then I changed the height, and I'm going to click OK. So that did change my composition of my elements here. I probably need to adjust that a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and go into my composition. So again, just double click on this will get you to the space where your document is layered. Now I'm going to increase the size so we can sort of see all of these, but just a quick little tip. The tilde button, which is above the tab and next to the number 1, if you hover over any one of these different panels, you can sort of zoom in. So if I hit that tilde button, even while this is playing, when I do the play button, it will sort of like close out all the rest of the information so that you can switch back and forth between seeing your layers and hitting that button so you can actually see your composition. This is super helpful. I'm on a laptop, obviously, so like the screen size is not super huge. I don't have like 2 monitors set up so that I can actually see both my timeline and my screen at the same time, which would be nice. If anyone wants to pitch in and get me a second screen, that'd be cool. Just, let me know. All right. The first thing I would do is to go through and make sure that all my layers are correctly labeled. These 3 are going to be my background layers. So I'm going to select those and then I'm going to change the color. So this little box right here will let me change the color of those layers. It makes it so that I can easily see sort of like where my background elements are. If this is my rectangle pieces, and I can hold down Command and hit the rectangle, the orange rectangle, which is a little bit higher on the layers list, and I can change this size as well and color. And then these are my squiggles, so I'll make them a different color. Again, this is just to sort of organize your layers. And as you can tell, it changes this background color here of what the timeline looks like. If they're all the same lavender color, it's kind of a pain in the butt to try and figure out where everything is. So it's very, very helpful if you change the color. So I like to do this at least so that there's no like really similar colors. Maybe that green's too close. There we go. When I'm organizing these. So this is my logo. It's going to be the same color as the tagline. And we'll make that lavender. And then I'll do these type layers as something as well. So maybe a yellow. So at least that I know all my organization is set up there. Now I haven't done anything yet except, change the colors of these layers. There is one other piece that is kind of helpful, and that is parenting. So you guys see this section right here that says parent and link. These parenting is you can do your animation on one layer and then be able to actually set up these settings so that you can mimic the layer styles within each of these. So if I want the rectangle that's orange to follow and do exactly the same movement as one of the other layers, like this blue rectangle here, I can just take this little pick whip, this thing right here, and just drag it down to the blue rectangle. Now this rectangle orange, anytime that I move or do anything to this one, it'll move them both. You see how those are like linked together. So it's kind of like a group. I can move those very individually, but I can also then give them a parent. So that is very, very helpful. We'll go over that a little bit more detail later. Let's talk about movement. So I'm going to simplify movement for you guys as best I can to sort of show you the things that you might want to do. So I'm just going to throw out an ellipse, sort of like a ball. This is just the thing that we're going to kind of play with that's on the screen. Now, when you want to control things, objects or layers, there's this little drop-down arrow over here. You click that and you can see all the different transform options under the transform section. There's different ways that you can set up the anchor point, which I need to fix on an object. You don't have to worry about this right now because this is just moving where that anchor point is into the center of the object. There's a little control button for that, but since we're bringing in our layers from Photoshop, you probably won't have to worry about that too much. This is opacity. Of course, you can make things invisible. You can change their position and their scale, rotation. These are kind of the basic transform options for every layer. The way that this works is if I hit this little stopwatch, I turn that on, it creates a keyframe, what's called a keyframe, this little diamond here, onto my timeline. I can see that my timeline is 30 seconds long. If I only want to sort of limit my view to a few seconds at a time, this will sort of, when I hit play, it'll just stop at the end of this blue bar here and then repeat until I tell it to stop playing. I can then move my timeline slider here to a position, let's say at 2 seconds, right here, this says 2 seconds. And I will just move this over, this object, if I click my move tool. So there I have my basic movement, right? It's gonna go from point A to point B in 2 seconds. And you can see that happen if I hit the space bar to play it. Very boring motion, and then it repeats because I've limited my scale and my size of the composition temporarily with this little slider. So very boring, lame, but we got it to move, right? A to B. Now, this little slider here at the bottom is kind of your zoom on your timeline, which is helpful. If you zoom in really, really close, you will see that there is individual frames. You can see this is 01F, 01 or 02F, 03F. Those are frames if you zoom in really close. At a certain scale, when you zoom out, it's going to switch to S, which is seconds. Those are different. The frames, when you're zoomed in really close, they're going to kind of snap to each other. So you can see it's kind of like snapping onto the frames. You can't put things in between frames. If you need more frames, you can just increase the number. But this seconds, it's going to like slide much more naturally. Okay, so a couple things we want to know about motion, right? So it is just moving A to B, and probably your site is going to kind of scroll up, right? But we want to make it look like it's got some sort of human motion to it. So something that sort of looks like you kind of started scrolling and then maybe increased your speed, and then it's going to slow down, right? So it's going to go a little bit slower at the beginning, faster in the middle, and then slow at the end. That'll make it look very, very natural. And there's ways that we can do that. The simplest way to do that is to select these keyframes. So let me hit pause here. If I hold shift and select both of these keyframes without clicking and dragging so that they don't move, I can right click on this, go to keyframe assistant, and choose this option, which is easy ease. The hotkey for this is F9. So this is a really great way to sort of add a little bit of character. So again, before I did this, just watch the motion, just very moving over in 2 seconds from point A to point B, super boring. If I right click and add this keyframe assistant, which is easy ease, and then hit play, do you see how it kind of slows down at the points just ever so slightly? Goes a little bit faster in the middle. Now we can increase this and change this dimension a little bit as well. So there's two things that you can kind of change even though you've set up your A point and your B point of where you want to go with your kind of motion. And there's ways to do this. Again, I'm on the position. I'm going to go ahead and select this frame. Hold shift and I'll select this one as well. And this little graph editor is right here. So there's a graph editor here. This will allow me to actually set up and change two different options. So let me scroll down so we can see these 2 points on the timeline. They're here. Let's zoom in a little bit closer so you guys can see those. So 2 points within that 2 seconds. There's a little chart down here that will let me choose if I want to edit the speed graph or edit the value graph. The value graph will allow me to click on these points in my motion, and then I have handlebars. So if I want to add a little bit of character to this, right? So like a little bit of motion, kind of similar to what you would see when you are adding motion to, or adding Bezier handles in Illustrator, you can give these a little bit of a character, right? So I'm like, now it's going to slide a little bit because I've changed that. That is the motion graph. I'm sorry, a value graph. So this now has kind of got a dip in it, which is nice, right? It's still the same points. It's still point A to point B, but now I've added in just a little bit of character to it, to the motion within this. So this is nice, kind of a nice way that I can add a little bit of like motion if I wanted to go past itself and come back. That's kind of a nice motion too, right? So like now we're adding a little bit of character, a little bit of, classing it up a little bit. Now, if we really want to control the motion of this, and here are my points again. Here's these points are on the graph in here. The distance is based in pixels, so you're kind of moving them around the pixel XY grid. But let's ignore that for a second. Go to Edit Speed Graph. So here's the speed of these objects. You can see that these points are on the graph in here somewhere. You can find them, and then they also have Bezier handles, but these handles change how quickly or slowly they increase in their speed. So if I pull this one out from the back, it's going to make it go much faster at the beginning and then much slower within the time span. This is still within 2 seconds. I haven't changed the distance in the time. It's still 2 seconds. But when I hit play now, it's going to zoom really quickly and then very slowly go down. And again, that's because I changed these Bezier handles. You can add a little bit of change in how they move if I want the motion to have very much in the middle. Right? So like it zooms in the middle, slow at the beginning, slow at the end, but zooms in between. So this is much more fun kind of transitional element, especially if this was something that you kind of swipe, right? So like if I'm swiping this, this is maybe the similar kind of motion that you want. And you get to it again by clicking on this chart here, making sure you click on this chart if it doesn't already have it set to Edit Speed Graph. And this is really, really fun to do, actually, because it's much more satisfying kind of motion. Now, if I want this to happen faster, right, I can close this graph, I can increase the time, or I'm sorry, decrease the time. If I want this to happen over a faster amount of speed, it just needs to go from point A to point B in less time. That will make it look like it's going faster. If you want something to look like it goes slower, still the same points, right, still point A to point B, you need to make sure that you increase the time. So if this is the kind of motion that you want for your site, you can set that up as well. So again, we went over the position, we started the stopwatch, we click the keyframes by actually moving where you want this to go in the timeline. So if I want to do a third motion, 1 second it goes here and the next second it goes somewhere else, I can just move my stopwatch or sort of my timeline bar here, go to a space where I want it to be. So where's like point 3, point C over here. Then I can start editing that graph again to give it a little bit more character. So it's going to kind of do this zoom motion on both sides, slow down as it gets to each point, and then return. Right? So that's fun. I mean, it's just a sphere, but at least it now has kind of like a character movement to it. This is one where I've set up some of that motion already. I'm going to go ahead and hit play, and we'll just sort of talk about what's going on. It'll reset, I think. There we go. Right, so we're sort of adding this layering of motion. And again, I have to use sound effects, right? Okay, so if this thing in the background moves first, I've been able to parent this logo type with this background layer. So I have that background layer. I set up, again, a motion so that it starts off kind of slow. It speeds up in the middle and then slows down. It gets to the second position, position B. As soon as that one starts, the next one goes just a little bit after. So it's sort of like, progression there. And then the beginning of this piece also goes last. So they all kind of just scroll together. And if this was a longer piece, right, mine was just sort of set to 768. But if this was a longer piece, you could move these even further over that distance and time to be able to show the motion of each of your series. So just to show what that looks like, I have parented a few of these pieces together so that you can see that like the tagline, which is beneath the logo, is just going to follow the logo. That way I only have to animate one layer. I don't have to animate both. I can still animate this one within that space, but it'll also do that motion. So if I wanted to add a little bit of a bounce or something to the tagline, I could do that, but it would still also bounce along with the regular logo. So that's parenting. And then just setting up kind of a distance here. This is what ended up looking like with the keyframes to be able to get this motion. One starts first, then the next one, then the one shortly after, and then they sort of all end in different positions based on how quickly or how slowly they add that motion in. So just some fun stuff that you can do with your layering. This is going to give you that parallax scrolling effect. The background layer is going to move the least amount of distance over the longest time. So there's that background one. It has the longest gap between the 2 points. The spaces that are coming forward in space, coming closer to the view of the viewer, you want to move those in longer distance in a shorter amount of time, so they look like they move more. And then if I were to do like the type even more, that whole section could move.